I still remember being in the Supreme Court on June 26, 2015, when court came to order and Justice Kennedy started to read his decision.
These cases come to us from Michigan, Kentucky, Ohio, and Tennessee. Those states define marriage as a union between one man and one woman.
I'm not an attorney, and legal writing isn't always clear to those of us who aren't attorneys. And I found myself wondering, well, did we really win? As Justice Kennedy continued reading his decision.
For these reasons and others set out in the opinion, the judgment of the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit is reversed.
I realized we did win, and I burst into tears, along with people throughout that courtroom. Not surprisingly, the first thought I had was, John, I wish you were here. I wish you could experience this. I wish you could know that our marriage could never be erased. And then that was closely followed by the realization that for the first time in my life as an out gay man, I felt like an equal American. You know, the first time I met John, I was still closeted. I was teaching high school German, and I knew I was gay, but I hadn't really admitted it to myself, and I certainly hadn't told anyone else. And I happened to go out with a friend to a bar near the university where we had both graduated. And we walk into this bar, and my friend Kevin said, well, there's my friend John. And John was at the bar drinking a gin and tonic, and he scared the daylights out of me. He was so comfortable in his skin as an out gay man. I thought for certain he was going to call me out and just say, come on, Jim, we all know you're gay, but he didn't. So that was the first time we met, and it was rather frightening, honestly. John and I were together for almost 21 years, and early on in our relationship, I would say within the first year and a half at most, we talked about marriage, and marriage was something that both of us wanted. But after discussing it, we both agreed that for us, marriage couldn't just be a symbolic ceremony. We wanted to get married only when it actually carried legal weight, only when it meant something. We got together in the early 90s in Cincinnati, and at that point, there was no place in the United States where you could get married as a same-sex couple. So we just thought we're never going to have this opportunity and just build our life together. And then it was in early, I want to say 2012, that I noticed when John was walking around our condo, it just sounded different. Like one foot was slapping the floor harder than the other. I finally convinced him to go to the doctor. And in June of 2012, a third neurologist concurred that it was ALS. ALS for John progressed fairly quickly. And by April of 2013, he started at-home hospice care. And on June 26, 2013, John called me into his room because there was news coming out from the Supreme Court. And I was standing next to his bed holding his hand when we learned that the Supreme Court, in their decision, United States versus Windsor, had struck down the Defense of Marriage Act. As that news is sinking in, I realized that for the first time in our life together, this was our opportunity to get married and actually have it carry legal weight. So I leaned over, hugged him, kissed him, and said, let's get married. We settled on Maryland pretty quickly because it was the only state that did not require both of us to appear in person to apply for a marriage license. And my whole goal in this was to make sure I kept John as safe and as comfortable and at home as much as possible. So we flew to Maryland on July 11th, 2013, landed, parked on the tarmac, and we got to hold each other's hands and make those promises we had wanted to make public and legal for almost 21 years. So that was on a Thursday. On Saturday, that story came out online, and friends of ours were at a party where they ran into a friend of theirs, all attorneys, and their friend was Al Gerhardstein, a civil rights attorney in Cincinnati. He hadn't seen our story. He knew nothing about us. So our friends filled him in. He left the party, got in touch with us through our friends later to say, would you be open to meeting? So he came to our home 5 days after we got married, and he pulled out a blank Ohio death certificate. And when he said, when John dies, his last official record as a person, his last record as an Ohioan, as a citizen of the United States will be wrong because Ohio, they're going to ignore your Maryland marriage. So here where it says marital status at time of death, they will enter unmarried. And here where it says surviving spouse name, Jim, your name's not going to be there. Hearing this and learning that John's last record as a person would be wrong made it hurtful. And when Al asked if we wanted to do something about it, were we willing to fight for each other? Were we willing to fight for our marriage? Were we willing to fight for what we believed in and what we knew was right? And I have to say that was a really easy yes. I honestly still have to pinch myself at times to remind myself that when I hear people talking about marriage equality or when they reference Obergefell, the case, that they're actually talking about me. It still really doesn't feel possible that I was part of that I've become part of this momentous step forward for equality in the United States. And the fact that people still stop me and recognize me and thank me, share photos with me, tell me stories. Those moments are so incredible. It just continually reminds me how important marriage is and what it means to people across our country that they have been able to, or they have the ability to marry the person that they love. In 2015, shortly before the decision came out, a good friend said, "Jim, have you thought about getting ordained or so that you could officiate same-sex marriages or marriages in general?" And this past weekend, I actually officiated my 23rd wedding. And it's been same-sex couples, it's been opposite-sex couples, it's been in many states and cities across the United States. It was in the south of France, and it's been such a joy being able to do this. And every wedding, especially same-sex marriages, have to include that last page of the Obergefell versus Hodges decision, because it's such a beautiful piece of writing, which we don't always expect from a legal decision.